To begin, I'd like to give special recognition to and special appreciation to Commissioner Tony Sertich, who chaired this effort and pulled it through the legislative session, and his terrific assistant, Jen Gates, who followed every twist and turn through the legislative process. So thank you very much. I want to thank Commissioner John Link Stein and the other agency heads who led this effort, put in the ideas, marshaled them through the various legislative committees. I'd like to thank the hundreds of state employees and thousands of Minnesota citizens who offered their insights and suggestions, many of which were adopted. And I want to thank legislators for making these improvements a priority during a brief and intense legislative session, and for offering their own ideas, and ultimately enacting some 1,175 of them. The middle class has a couple of examples of practical changes that are going to make life simpler for Minnesotans. The first tax cut bill has a number of features that will make tax forms easier to understand, less time consuming to prepare, and simpler to manage. And that will benefit over 1 million Minnesota citizens and businesses. For example, before the change, taxpayers had to fill out a complicated tax form and a 14-step worksheet to calculate their Minnesota student loan interest deduction. After the law changed, the Department of Revenue eliminated the form and the worksheet. Now taxpayers simply claim the deduction on their federal tax forms, and this information is automatically applied to their Minnesota taxes. The Department of Natural Resources transformed a dense 92-page fishing regulation book into a new mobile-friendly website that is easy to use and easy to understand. This new mobile accessible solution helps anglers easily access the information they need when they're on the go, and if I ever catch a fish, I will use it myself. Because of the major reforms implemented in 2011, 97% of all job-creating business permits are approved by state agencies now in less than 150 days. New legislation passed this session will reduce those wait times for most businesses to just 90 days. And again, I salute you, Commissioner Stein, for implementing that so well within your agency. That means that an estimated 11,000 of the 15,000 permit requests that the state receives from businesses each year are expected to be completed within the new 90-day goal, and many of them much sooner than that. So I think we're off to a very good start. Again, I want to thank those who provided the leadership and the impetus, the legislators who supported this, and that'll turn it over to Commissioner Sertich. Thank you again for your terrific work. My pleasure.
Well, there's the old adage that time is money. And when you look at how this will impact Minnesotans' lives, all of these changes, it's going to save Minnesotans and businesses a lot of time when they interact with government. I'm happy to report that we started this whole endeavor at the beginning of session with over 1,000 ideas in how to improve state government. And what passed was more than that, and really the credit to that goes to the legislature for growing that number. We got rid of all the silly laws that we talked about at the front end that made a lot of folks chuckle. We got rid of the a misdemeanor for fruit size, having a different fruit size or container for fruit. We got rid of all those just silly statutes that nobody really understood why they're still in the books. And then we really got the heart of a few other issues, and I just want to highlight a couple more, and the governor really got the big ones. But for Minnesota businesses, records retention is a huge issue when they have to keep unemployment records for many, many years. We cut that time in half because that's all that's required by the federal government. And so whether you're a business, whether you're an individual, you're going to see a better customer service from state government after this initiative. And I think it's just a great exercise. Coming from the legislature, as I did beforehand, really when you come to St. Paul during session, you come to do things. You don't necessarily come to undo things. And so it was great that the governor really put out this call to action to say, before you pass any new laws, we should look through the books and make sure that we clean them up, and are all these laws really still necessary? And so what you have before you here is almost 1,200 laws that were eliminated this year that are going to save Minnesotans and businesses time and money because they'll no longer have to deal with all of these different areas of government. So probably the biggest The two biggest ones that I can think of is the permit reform that Commissioner Stein's going to talk about, but the other piece is plain language, and this is one that will be popping up again and again when you look at state government. Governor Dayton signed an executive order instructing agencies to use plain language when they're interacting with Minnesotans. And already we've seen successes, whether it be the fishing regulations or the DNR website for campers. But another big one, and especially important as we come through Memorial Day weekend, is our Veterans Affairs. Totally redid their website to make sure it was much easier for those veterans that deserve those services that Minnesotans and the federal government provides them, have easier access to finding those details for themselves, their children, and their families. And so very excited all across the board about these changes. And it really goes to show you, so often at the Capitol, especially during session, it's about Democrat or Republican, right or left, big or small. But the one thing that can unite us all, that we should agree upon, is government should run better. And that's been a hallmark of the Dayton administration, and that was a hallmark of this initiative. And Commissioner Linkstein can talk more about the permit reform.
Thank you, Commissioner Sertich, and thank you, Governor, for this opportunity to talk about the permitting reforms going on in the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. In 2011, Governor Dayton issued an order to issue permits within 150 days. As he said, we're about 90% plus for all job-creating permits moving through the agency now at that pace. When we're doing so well, as an agency committed to continuous improvement and efficiency, we thought it looked right and timely to set a second-tier goal for ourselves. And so the 90-day permitting goal will now create that second tier for the permits that can move more effectively and efficiently through our processes. And that, as the governor said, will be about 11,000 permits we estimate per year. We will continue to protect public health and the environment as we issue those permits. We achieve these efficiencies through better process design, through more effective communication with permit applicants, and through an improved web interactive permit application process that's in the midst of being created. So we look forward to reporting on this in the coming year, how we're doing on that two-tiered permitting system. The other thing that the law allows us to do is increase our flexibility in working with regulated parties so that we can come up with more effective ways to achieve the same goals. Water quality trading is one example, and allowing us to issue permits for a longer period of time for those things that are more fully and easily understood now with the passage of 40 years since the Clean Water Act was passed and the same amount of time since the Clean Air Act was implemented. Thank you.
We've got to respond to questions on this subject and then open it up for others later.
Were there any major initiatives that you just couldn't do? I mean, were there anything that sort of came up in the course of this that as the legislative session sort of got rolling that it just became apparent it wasn't going to happen this year?
Well, shortening the administrative rule timeline was, did anything go through at all in that? No. So that was major disappointment. That was going to be one of the principal features of it, to reduce especially non-controversial rules from 18 to 24 months down to 6 to 8 months, and even shorten the more controversial ones as well. And there were some legislative objections to that from people who just didn't kind of get with the spirit of what was intended there, and maybe other opposition as well, I'm not aware. And then there were some other committees that didn't want to take on anything that was even remotely controversial. Maybe you could elaborate, Commissioner.
Well, yeah, the rulemaking reform was the big one, and the other one that I'm most disappointed about is the Commissioner of Agriculture still has to catch wild boars. That's still a law. Good question. Reason being, actually, is there have been times when you go through this process, it was better to propose things that maybe still had a reason for being in existence. And the main reason for that one is there's still opportunities where wild boars, which can be dangerous, I've been told. I'm a ranger. We don't have a lot of boars up on the Iron Range. But what I've been told is they brought some into the Twin Cities from time to time, and it was good just in case they got loose that Department of Agriculture was aware of that. And so that was one one, along with rulemaking, that's going to sit on the sidelines. But it was good to know. I mean, and that's why this process was important. That you bring all these ideas to the table, and we find out if these laws are still needed. We found out the wild boar law was still needed. And so I still want to release one in Minneapolis or St. Paul and see if Commissioner Frederickson is going to track it down. So stay tuned this summer. If you see me around town with a pickup truck, I might be might have my phone in my hand and see if Commissioner Frederickson is up to the task.
Just one follow-up on that. Yeah. Did the law state that he had to personally do this?
He may delegate it. I'm, as a commissioner, I'm learning about this this delegation of powers that you can do, but I'd like to see him personally get out there and do it himself.
Commissioner, any others akin to that popped up that came through? I noticed something, it apparently was illegal to drive in neutral. Any other?
We got rid of all the other silly ones. Yep, they're all taken care of. Well, the ones we found. I'm sure there are still more laws on the books, and that's the great part about this is a lot of the low-hanging fruit was cut, but there are still opportunities to go back through the books, and hopefully the legislature will revisit this again. I think it's a worthwhile exercise. I think Minnesotans expect their legislature to get to the business of making sure before they pass any new laws, they look through the old laws and see if they're still necessary.
Is it fair to say that the vast majority of Minnesotans will not notice any of this?
No, I think Minnesotans will notice a better customer service when they're interacting with state government with some of the major provisions. Sure, we got rid of the silly stuff, but if you're a Minnesotan who interacts, whether you're trying to fish, whether you're trying to get a campsite, whether you file your taxes, you're going to see better improved service with this initiative.
From a business standpoint, you mentioned the record keeping. So how does the business find out what laws may have changed that it does affect them?
The different agencies that work with these. I run a small business as well, and so you get postcards, you get emails about certain law changes, and so with that records retention, it means for a lot of small businesses like ours, we're going to take these Tupperware containers full of records and be able to recycle them, which is a big deal because they're just sitting around collecting space, and it's really a hassle. And so every agency.
Even with this number of changes that were made, you're still going to be able to reach out to all of these different businesses? That's the expectation?
For those ones that are important to businesses, there will be communication from state agencies. For some of these other laws, I don't think, well, you all have done a good enough job broadcasting that you can go ahead and drive in neutral again now if you can figure out how. But for the rest of them, the individual agencies will be communicating with businesses.
I mean, Department of Labor and Industry, for example, has reduced their application form, and they'll communicate that directly to all of the businesses that apply, which is several thousand. So, and then the Department of Employment and Economic Development has a one-stop shop for businesses, especially new ones that are unfamiliar with the various labyrinth of various state agencies. So that will also be information available through them.
Would some of these things happen anyway in the normal course? And you brought up the DNR moving to a more mobile-friendly platform. How is that Unsession, and that's not just keeping up with the times?
Well, it's both. I'm not sure whether that one required a legislative change. A lot of these items are required by statute and required to be provided in paper forms, where now website information is readily available. Things don't get undone in government very readily. They tend to kind of just carry on because they're in statute, and people assume then that they have sort of an automatic permanence there. And it's just, as Commissioner Sertich said, it's not in the nature of legislators to arrive to undo something. And what I think one of the remarkable features of this, as far as I'm concerned, is that when we proposed this last fall, we expected a non-budget year. We expected the revenues to remain where they were, and so this would be the principal focus of the short session. Well, we had major surplus, which is a great situation to deal with, and so, but all the ancillary interests, issues, pressures that accompany that the legislators still found time to make this a priority is something that I really appreciate, and hope that it'll be a tradition that will continue, maybe not in the entire session, but in 2 years we'll have a chance, somebody will have a chance to take another whack at it.
That's my next question. I mean, is this sort of the end of this, or is there more ambitious stuff that you want to do going forward?
Oh, there's a lot more ambitious stuff I want to do going forward, and I'd be glad to disclose that in one of my early speeches next year. Yeah, I mean, these things that are non-controversial, the things that had aroused some opposition, we backed off of this time because we wanted to get it going. We wanted cooperation. Something like the administrative rules, I would certainly take on the next time and challenge, because it just makes state government operate so much more efficiently. Some people don't want that when it comes down to it.
Any other questions on this topic?
Yes, I have one for,
How many boards and commissions were abolished?
The experts in the back of the room, Jen, do you?
I think it was a total of around 31, but I have to.
And that's an area where that was not a focus of this effort, because again, that tends to be controversial. As the Sunset Commission learned last year, you know, there are reasons for every board and commission. There are constituency groups behind them, and if you want to have them spend every waking moment at the Capitol, just propose to eliminate what it is. So there are a whole lot of those, and I handle appointments for almost all of them, and I can vouch that there are just so many that seldom meet that we have to go out and try to find applicants for the available positions where there's only one applicant for the available position. And so that's an area which will be very controversial, but really needs to be taken on. And if I come back, I'd probably look at doing that next session and not waiting until the even numbered year.
Governor, I don't recall the federal conformity provisions being talked about as unsession ideas previously. Was that a change along the way?
No, we talked about them in that light. It was overshadowed by the magnitude of the tax cuts, but you can go back and look at our releases back then. We said this will simplify the tax preparation and the time it takes to do tax forms, as well as reduce people's taxes. But we considered the conformity to be an unsession. We would have passed it anyway, but it did fit that mold. But if you don't want to give us credit for it, you don't have to do that. We'll take credit for the $550 million in tax cuts.
Anything else?
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, anything else?
Governor, obviously the construction here at the Capitol is kicking into high gear. You see folks boxing up, ready to move out. How's it affecting your office, and what's the plan?
Well, we're just starting that process. It's suddenly upon us. It's going to be a huge disruption and a huge dislocation, which is why previous administrations have put it off for as long as they did. But it's necessary, and it's like highway construction. You're miserable while you go through it, and then afterward you see the improvements. You say, "Wow, it was well worth it." So I'm glad that it has really been a nonpartisan issue. I think the general public overwhelmingly understands the need for it, the support for it. So it hasn't been a budget issue. It hasn't been a subject of political maneuvering, and that speaks well for the people's respect for this building and the recognition that this just has to be done. But it's going to be 2.5 very different years.
Governor, where do you stand on the marijuana bill? Have you decided what you're going to do with that?
I'm going to sign it, definitely sign it. Been waiting to see whether the advocates wanted to have an actual signing of the bill, or have me just sign it and do a ceremonial signing some later date. But if I'll sign it one way or the other next couple of days.
What about online gambling?
That one I'm on the knife's edge. I read a lot, pros and cons over the weekend, and they're strongly held views. I just if the bill were just to prevent more online gambling, or even eradicate that which exists now, I wouldn't have trouble signing it, even with the protections that the lottery officials tell me are in place to prevent habitual gambling and also under the age of 18 gambling. But as so many of these bills, it became more than that. You've got prohibition against ATM machines and pay at the pump machines, lottery machines, and which have nothing to do with internet gambling. And then they added a couple of prohibitions for Keno and for poker, which again have more to do with protecting the economic interests of the groups that now have their piece of the pie and don't want anybody else to intrude upon it than anything else. So that bothers me. On the other hand, you've got serious legislative leadership that sponsored the bill and overwhelming vote. I think there are only 2 opposed in the House. So clearly, if they were still in session, it would be a veto override, but they're not in session, so I still have that decision. I'll make it by the end of the week.
Sounds like a veto, though.
I'm torn. You know, again, there are valid reasons to sign it, the valid reasons not to sign it. Those are always the ones that, you know, get to be difficult.
The other one you have left is that data bill.
Yeah, we're working out the final details of that one, and that should be ready to be announced today or tomorrow.
You're working on the details, it sounds like you're putting together a letter.
We're putting it together. I'm going to sign the whole bill with a couple, a line item, veto a couple of provisions in it that have dollars attached to them. We're still working out what I have the legal authority to line item veto, but the underlying bill, and particularly as it relates to the data practices, but also the health care plans and the like, is all going to be signed into law. That's those 3, and then the what's the cleanup bill called? The revisers bill, yeah, the last one.
Any other questions?
After Governor, you've got the political conventions coming up this weekend. Obviously, you will get endorsed. Are you anxious to find out what happens with the Republicans and who they decide to endorse?
I'm certainly very interested. Yes, you know, they'll go through their own process, and it appears that they'll have a primary in August with the endorsed candidate if they do endorse, and 1 or 2 others. So it's not going to be conclusive, but it'll certainly be informative. And yes, I plan to tune in.
Governor, you're going to have a lot of people talking about you down there, and you're going to be in Duluth seeking the endorsement of your party. So you switched to a different phase now. What's your message coming out of this convention into this summer?
Well, we've accomplished what we said we would. We've achieved a great deal of progress. We have Minnesota moving forward. We've balanced the state budget. We've reestablished fiscal responsibility. We're looking at budget surpluses rather than deficits. We raised taxes only on the wealthiest 2% of Minnesotans and smokers. Everyone else almost everyone else got a tax reduction from this session. And we used that money, the additional revenues, to invest in education, first and foremost, all-day kindergarten starting next fall, early childhood education scholarships, tuition freezes at the University of Minnesota and the Minsky campuses, none of which would have happened if we'd followed the old Republican path of just no tax increases and dump the problems down the road and raise property taxes for everybody indirectly. And that we need to continue that forward, and that we will do so if I'm sent back and we have a DFL House joined with the DFL Senate. I think we've shown in this last session that we can be very fiscally responsible and have a measured, balanced approach to both spending revenues on education, things that are important, adding to the budgeted reserve for the first time in a decade, and reducing taxes. So I think that hopefully people should be reassured that we have a responsible control over government. We have a government that works now. We have a responsible decision-making process. We make decisions, we act on them, we take steps to improve people's lives as opposed to the gridlock and the deadlock in Washington, which is what you get with divided government, especially in this very acrimoniously partisan era that we're in. So I think we have a good story to tell and a good case to make for the future, and I'll be spending a lot of my time between now and then actively making that case.
Governor Dayton, regarding the first tax bill, did you get any feedback from accountants, particularly in the Iron Range area, that complained about an undue burden on small town accountants and specifically low returns, additional returns between $15 and $80 on average?
I'm sorry, I don't understand. What the complaints about what?
Well, I understand that people, particularly in small towns who are accountants, complain that there was an undue burden on them for refiling taxes regarding the first tax bill.
Well, in terms of that time, I've not heard that, but I mean, I could understand how, for everybody involved in the Department of Revenue, people were working, round the clock overtime for 2 solid weeks. The timing, was not ideal, and all things being perfect, it would have occurred even earlier. As far as the B2B taxes, preferably would not have occurred at all. But you know, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I think we did the right thing. We maybe didn't do it as soon as we possibly could, but it's going to save a lot of businesses money, a lot of individuals money, and that makes it worthwhile.
Okay, thank you all.
Okay, thanks.